let's talk.
It's really amazing to me how many people, still say there are books. A lot of people, since the show ended, it's kind of, it's a bit of a life preserver, to actually be able to still look at the characters, even though that there's no new episodes of the show. The characters are still alive in those books.
When I first started out, I figured, okay, well, this is the starting point, in Walt's life, with the cold dish. And I thought, now here's where we go, and we're going to have a chronology that's going to start from this point and in this geographic territory and all of this. And very quickly, it dawned on me that this was not going to work. It was going to be difficult to try and stay in that one locale, because how many people can you kill in the least populated county, in the least populated state, before it gets kind of stupid? And then I started thinking, okay, well, Walt's going to have his jurisdiction kind of expand out, and if he's got his reputation precedes him, then, people are going to ask him to possibly, take a look at cold case files, to look at certain, investigations that they're being involved with. And that makes for a much broader kind of area for Walt. A lot of times I'm very curious as to, how he became who he is. I was interested in his military service. I was interested in, how did he start out in the sheriff's department as a deputy under Lucian Connolly? What was that like? And I thought, well, the only way that you're going to find out about those things is if you write those novels. That's how I kind of broke loose, from that chronology, and was able to go back and revisit, some of the times and periods, when Walt was evolving. And you can see, glimmers, of who he is and who he was going to be. You can't really force those characters, to be unlike themselves, especially when you've got a history of 20 novels with these characters in them. I mean, readers have already gotten an idea of who these characters are, what they do, and how they're going to respond to certain things and you can't have them all of a sudden turn 360 degrees and so you just kind of once again have to make sure that you got the right characters to tell the right story. I'm always looking back in time and thinking to myself, how many authors have there been that never really got a chance to talk or deal with their readership that. And so for me, imagine walking into a room where there are a couple hundred people there that are so excited. They want to get your name. They want you to sign your name in their book and talk to you about your writing and all of that. I mean, it's a pretty great way to make a living in many ways.
Please welcome Craig Johnson to the Northwest Passages stage.
Had some fun. If you want to know how PowerPoint works for me, that was 96 slides. I've had a lot of energy drinks today.
You got to tell them who came, to the ranch, and did that work.
Yeah, no. So the all the video work, we sent our audio-visual person to hang out with Craig. It's also known as my son, Johnny Curley. And what's funny is, and you now know this, he loves Longmire.
Wow, we almost abducted him. He almost did not come back, I have to tell you. So, we were going to keep him. But then we knew you'd be in trouble.
So he literally was like, "Don't be pissed at me, Dad," but we talked for 2 or 3 hours, and I didn't record any of it. It's okay. It was okay. So Craig, I have been warned that I have got to quit taking my clothes off in public, but I can't help it. It's just one of my favorite things.
Okay.
Because you always dress like this, and I felt like I can't pull that off.
Yeah.
But there is a certain one I could pull off. I mean, if you think about what my background is. So let's see here. Hang on. This is big payoff here. Big payoff.
We'll be the judge of that.
Yeah. So I didn't tell my wife. I didn't really tell anybody I was going to do this. This is kind of a secret that I kind of did, and I'm not really trying to, So Woody has the pull on the back there, and so there's that, and you always wear. Whoops.
I was going to say, is the ring supposed to go?
No, it's not supposed to go that way.
Okay.
It's not supposed to go that way. I don't put this on very often, just at home. Home, and then there's, and then so no, I'm not done. I'm not done. I'm not done. So, right. Get your pictures now. This is how I would dress Walt.
Okay.
I mean,
He would stand out.
look,
in Wyoming,
look,
yes.
I don't know if you've seen, but Bo Peep's not terrible. We should talk about your book.
What is the circular thing on your back?
So,
What is that?
so he's a pull. He got to pull this to make him talk.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Now
Right.
I understand. Okay.
Well, yeah. Wait till you see that my shoes say Andy. So what's? So welcome.
Well-
It's getting really hard to come up with new ways to try to make you laugh.
Evidently not.
So look, we got to talk about the new book. So you got to tell us a little bit about it last time. Tell us again with not a lot of spoilers.
Okay.
Though I have a few spoilers, but you're going to like them.
Okay. You're always when I first started out writing the books, it was interesting like that because a lot of people were asking me like that, especially in reviews and interviews and things like this. They would say, "Do you worry about writing a series and running out of ideas?" And I was like, "No, I live in Wyoming. There's more stories than I'm ever going to be able to write. I'm going to die with like a folder, that's going to be like 8 inches thick." And so, and one of the main reasons why it is I don't worry about it is because I read newspapers.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, and so a lot of them pale in comparison with this newspaper like that because they're the weeklies, where they have like one edition that comes out. Because a lot of the towns are smaller, like and so they have one edition that comes out once a week. And but it's interesting like that because they will print shit that nobody else will.
I know.
Because they figure, what, we don't have any money, so they can sue us if they want. We don't care, like and so there's wild stories like that you won't read anywhere else. And so there was this article, like it was about this woman who had the longest postal route in the United States, over 300 miles a day. She travels like that, delivering the mail. She has 5 stops. I'm so glad you guys laughed. Because I try that joke in places like Pennsylvania and New York, and they always look at me and they always go, "Really? Wow, okay, yeah." That's a Wyoming joke, But yeah, like that. And so, some of the stories about her, like that, were just incredible. Like that, there was one point in time where there was this storm that, just basically shut down all the roads like that. And she got on her snowmobile and put a trailer behind her snowmobile, a little drag sled, and put everything on there. And and there was an instance where she lost 2 toes because she crashed the snowmobile and then got frostbite on 2 toes, hauling the sled herself to this little town called Barroil. And it just, the more I read about it, the more I thought this is an incredible story. This would really be something. Because the interesting thing for me is that, you're talking about an area that she serves that's like the size of Vermont, or something. And so the question, of course, is that like, okay, if she disappears, where do you look for her?
Right.
My gosh, like you get to disappear like that. And so then one of my favorite quotes about location is the one from another newspaper man, Stud Sturkle, and his statement was, "Nothing ever happened nowhere." And so immediately when I started thinking about that, I started thinking about, okay, well, where would you have this story take place? And I thought that Red Desert region down in the south central portion of Wyoming, it's the home of the largest living sand dune in the United States. Now, I would have thought that would have been, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, or something like that. It's actually in Wyoming. You can actually see it from space. It's a sand dune area that's that big. And I thought that's something that Walt hasn't had to contend with. That might be interesting. And so that's how it starts out like that. And, of course, what happened is I thought I got to dig a little bit deeper on this. And so I thought, well, I guess I'll get in touch with the postal, inspector, for the state of Wyoming. And that's when Wyoming is really cool because you can call up, the number for the postal inspector and he'll answer the phone and talk with you for an hour, And so we're talking up for an hour and everything. And, he's really got all kinds of information. One of the things he told me was, he says, it's not a federal crime, right? And I said, what's that? He said, abduction of a postal worker. He said, that's contract labor for rural delivery. Like, and he says they're not, he says not a federal employee per se. Like, and so it wouldn't be a federal crime. And I was like, really? Like, and he goes, yeah, but the mail would be. And I was like, what? Like, and he goes, yeah. As soon as that mail goes into the the mailbox, like, he says it becomes federal property. Like, and he says and that makes it a federal offense. Like, and so he said you got to go find that mail. And he says I can get anybody I want. Like, for a detective and investigator to go find out about that. And he paused for a second and he goes, I'd get Walt Longmire. So it basically leads to Walt's second undercover operation. And I don't know if you guys remember Dark Horse, the first undercover operation that Walt had that did not go well. I mean, he's got a couple of things going against him. He's like about 6'5", weighs about 260 pounds. So he doesn't blend in real easily. And there's a part I think where the woman that's he's trying to fool into thinking that he's a postal worker. She's looking at him and he says I can see she was looking at that part of my ear that was missing, that scar that goes across my eye, and all the scars on my hands and everything. And she looks at him and she goes, I don't know what you are, but you're not a postie, And so. So they kind of figure him out pretty quick, I have to admit.
It was the him being so terrible at undercover that it was delightful.
Oh yeah, delightful. Yeah.
I had
they use a
some
lot of
suggestions.
acronyms they're a lot of in the business of the mail duty, at the RMDs, AB7s, and OTRs and all this kind of stuff, and Walt doesn't know what any of those are, and so there's an entire period there in the Rock Springs region in Sweetwater County where nobody got their mails. All I can tell you,
So I thought we should come up with some suggestions to help Walt.
Okay.
Okay, I did. Here, let me. That's him, right?
Yep.
I don't know.
That's
what
his
that
TV
is.
version.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. I don't know. Really, might work. High school football coach could work. That is a college English.
Wow.
Yeah, college English professor.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, right. That's a newspaper editor.
Oh my.
Yeah. That's a chef. Yep. That's Bond.
Okay. 007.
Bond.
Okay.
Right. I don't know that they're great ideas.
I'll send those to Robert and see what he says.
Tell me what he thinks. I send him this one.
Absolutely.
It's pretty good. So spoiler alert, not a major plot point. Walt finally gets a cell phone. But, I mean, it's kind of a cell phone.
Yeah. He's in the situation where he realizes, and he doesn't even have anybody to borrow one off of, so he goes into this vape shop, and they've got they've got rebuilt cell phones, right? And so Walt says, I'm looking for a cell phone, and his guy's like, what do you want? 5G? Do you want this? You want that? And everything. And Walt's like, I just want to be able to make calls and get calls is what I want. And he's like, okay, and so he pulls this thing out, and it was funny because in the original draft. In the book, it's called a jitterbug. You've probably seen those commercials. It's for older people, and all this. And so, and anyway, Walt's looking at it, and he goes, well, he says it's refurbished. And Walt goes, well, it looks new. And he goes, well, people don't have these for very long. And Walt's like, well, why is that? And he goes, well, they die. And Walt says, well, not from the phone. He goes, no, because they're old, man. And he's like, oh, okay. All right. And so it's kind of all the way through the book, it kind of makes fun of the jitterbug, right, all the way through. And so when they got the first draft of Viking Penguin, they wrote me back and they said, yeah, I think you better change the name because they might sue you, just so you know. And so we had to change the name. So it's Jugbug now is what it's called. So yeah, I won't tell you if the phone works out or if it doesn't work out, but there is a certain point in time where the postal inspector, Walt's like, it's not working, and he looks at it and he goes, have you charged it? Walt's like, you have to do that? He's like, yeah, you have to do that every once in a while. So it's not a match made in heaven, I don't think.
So when I told my mom, she was like, no shit.
Yeah. There are a lot of people wondering if it's going to work out.
Totally true.
Yeah, I'm
Mom
not going to
did
ruin it for you. You have to wait and see.
Yeah. So writing, switch gears. The previous 3 books have been about young Walt.
Uh-huh.
So what was it like to write about young Walt? Did you already kind of have his character established, or was it fun to find new things out about Walt?
Oh, no. Look, the first time that I did it, that was actually in the 4th book, because what happened is whenever you start out, you have a lot of other authors that are giving you advice about what you should do and what you shouldn't do and all of this and there was some funny stuff like that, but one of the things they said you can't change the time chronology, and have the character younger, different things like that. You can't go to different geographic locales or anything like that. And then I think I've told that story before. One of the big things they said, you can have sexual tension between your characters, but you can't have anything happen for 17 or 18 books. And my response to that was, what kind of women are you dating that would wait 17 years for something to happen? That's not very realistic, I don't think. And then it seemed to me another one that they told me was that they shouldn't have pets. That your character should not have pets, because you will forget to feed them and they will die. And people will write and go, you didn't feed the dog the whole time in that one scene, that one episode, then that one novel. But for me, it was a real easy kind of decision to make as far as the dog was concerned, simply because, Walt, is an armed man driving around all over Wyoming, solving crimes and he's armed and if he's by himself in the truck, right, he's got 2 options. He can either talk to himself or he could talk to the dog, right? Well, I don't know about you guys, but armed people to talk to themselves kind of worry me a little bit. So I thought maybe he'd talk to the dog, because we all do that. And so this book is very heavy on dog because Walt's undercover on his own out there by himself and I thought I can't have him be completely by himself. He's got to have somebody to talk to so he's got the dog. And the funny thing was the dog actually came from a dog that I had, Max. And what happened was, when I was building the ranch, I was building it myself, and it was out there in the middle of nowhere, and you couldn't hire anybody out there because nobody wanted to drive all that way out there to work and then turn around and go home. And so I built it myself. I also figured that anything you fine-tune with a chainsaw, I could probably do, And so, and I was out there working by myself, and sleeping under a tarp and all this, and I thought, what? I've never had a dog. I've never had a dog in my adult life. Maybe I should go into the pound and get a dog. And so I drove into Sheridan, 28 miles away, and I get there, and I go in and the high school kid that's working at the shelter and I'm looking in there, and the dogs are out in the general area there, and they're all barking and and snapping and jumping around, doing all this stuff. And there's this one dog that's leaned up against the fence in the back there, doing this Sarah Bernhardt, thing, and I look back there, he's about 60 pounds or so, and I look back, and I talking to the kid, and I said, it must be harder to find a home, for the older dogs like that. And he goes, yeah, he's going to get the shot tomorrow. And I was like, load him up. So they load him up, and I drive him over to this buddy of mine, Mike Pilch, who's the veterinarian in town, and I bring him in, and Mike's like, well, what kind of dog is this, Craig? And I said, I've got my little piece of paper that this high school kid wrote out with pencil, right? And I'm like, he's part German Shepherd, and he's part Husky, and he's peeling the dog's lips back, looking at his lips and looking at his teeth, and he goes, this dog is a lot of St. Bernard. And I was like, really? And he goes, yeah, and it's a puppy. And I was like, what? He goes, yeah, this dog's only maybe less than 2 months old. Look at him. I was like, he was 147 pounds by the time he got through growing. And the great thing about it was just me and him, just me and him out there when I was building the house. And he literally, we had such a connection. I mean, I literally could point to tools, and he would go get them and bring them over and give them to me and I mean, and I would talk, and it was interesting because, my wife didn't come out from Pennsylvania until I had doors and windows and heat. So women are strange that way, so So anyway, I had doors and windows and heat in there. She showed up and she goes, "Hey, do you know that the dog nods when you talk to it?" And I was like, "Really?" And she goes, "Yeah." She says, "I've never seen a dog nod when you talk to it." And I noticed he did. He literally would nod his head when I would talk to him and everything like that. And so it was this really strange, kind of relationship where we'd known each other so well that it was odd like that. And I thought whenever it came time for Walt to have a sidekick, I was like, "Yeah, I know where the sidekick should come from," like that. So. His name was Max, because he was the maximum amount of dog allowed, and then when it came time to name the dog, it just had to be dog, because I always refer to Walt as Sheriff Interruptus, his house is not finished, the dog never got a name, all these things. When his wife died, everything just stopped. And so he's still trying to get going again like that even now, And we are 21 books into the series, but it's kind of interesting because a lot of times people will ask me about Walt's age. And I get these emails from people, they'll write me these 2-page emails where they've gone through all the books and taken every instance, every historical reference, every moment in Walt's life, everything, gone through 2 pages of material like it, and they say, "And from this I have discerned that Walt is this age." And I always write them back and go, "Okay." They're like, "You don't want to argue about it or anything?" I'm like, "No, you just look like you did a lot of work here. I don't want to mess that up for you." So they're like, "So you agree?" And I'm like, "No, I didn't say that." So one of the things about the books is they're written in what I refer to as the Vivaldi. They're in a 4-season bunch, and the reason I got that was from my buddy Tony Hillerman. He was like, "You got to find a framework that gives you a different kind of environment for each book." And January and July ain't nothing alike in Wyoming. And so what I did was I thought if I do the seasons, because as Westerners, that's what has the largest scale effect on us. And so I thought if I do the seasons, then it will take me 4 books to get through 1 year of Walt's life. So I accidentally stumbled onto this ability to retard Walt's aging process. So here we are 20 years later. Walt's only 5 years older than when we first met him. It's been a rambunctious 5 years, I got to tell you. But that it kind of helps as far as because I beat him up pretty bad in this book too. Once again,
Right.
So
For those who've not been to other book clubs, I always ask him about why he's so mean. I tried to go through all of his medical injuries and only got to about 30. So one of my favorite things about you coming to Spokane is that I have people who I'm like, "You should come," and they're like, "Well, we haven't read the book." And I'm like, "Look, we begin his tour here. No one's read the book. None of us know what it's. You can completely come and not know anything.
There's not going to be a quiz.
Yeah,
It's not like church where you sit in the front row and you get called on.
Right. and look, and if you've never been to an author talk, Craig's not really an author talk. It's more like talking to your buddy, So I was going to ask what early reactions were, but it just came out. So this one's great though. That it's a first-class addition to the series. The action-packed suspenseful that makes you wish we'd paid for overnight shipping. Right? Great. That's from our review. It's pretty good. And Brendan wrote the hell out of that, or he would have been fired. So. But the early everyone who has read it. They love being back.
It's getting really, really great reviews. And it was interesting because even the early, because you get these I guess they're industry reviews, from Library Journal, like Kirkus, Publishers Weekly, all those, and so it's been really fun to see that. But I have to admit, one of the reasons, people laugh because they ask, do you have any degrees in writing? And I'm like, you've listened to me talk for 45 minutes. What would lead you to believe that I have any kind of educational background to what it is that I do? But I actually do, and but I overcame that to become a writer, and. It was kind of tough there for a while. But one of the things I got was I got a playwriting degree because I figured, you know what? I don't know anything about dialogue. And I thought these playwright guys, that's all they've got is dialogue. And so I thought if I get a playwriting degree, that'll be something I can utilize, as a talent, for that tool belt. So I'll feel like I can, really write a novel like that. And so, everybody, all the editors at Viking Penguin, they were like, "Oh my gosh, Craig, it's the dialogue, that really makes makes the books really work. It really is. And then all of the industry reviews have come out, and even the reviews for this book, and they're all like, boy, it's the descriptive passages. It's the descriptives in Craig's books that are really the incredible part. And I'm like, did they read my book? Is that my book that they read? So I'm still waiting to find out. We'll see.
So let's see what else I got here before I move on here. Did you want to be a mailman?
I did. I really did. And I don't think that's weird. Because I got to be honest with you, when you grow up in a really rural area, that's your touch to the outside world. I mean, it's the Wells Fargo wagon. Is what it is. Coming in, and it's the touch that you have with the outside world, and everything shows up through the mail. And so for me, it was kind of essential to the whole process to even think about like that. And I think the U.S. Postal Service does an incredible job. Everybody makes fun of them and everything, but I think in 60-some years, they've lost 2 things of mine. I'm like, that's pretty good, like that. And I've got a really great, Andy Rodriguez, is my mailman, and he's a great guy, like that. And we talk about the books every time he delivers, because he reads very slowly. He likes to read a chapter and then talk to me about it, and then read another chapter, and then talk to me about it. And subsequently, he's 7 books back, like that, And he's asking me these really detailed questions, like, well, when Walt says this, when so-and-so says that, what does he mean by, and I'm like, I don't remember. I'm going to have to go back and reread that chapter and try and find out, like that, so. But he keeps me on my toes, too.
I love that. So with this book, you're right, so far ahead. We were talking about this book more than a year ago.
Oh, yeah.
So do you get lost in those details where you're already working on the next book and somebody asks you about this book?
Well, that's the psychotic part about being a writer is that you're going out and you're talking about one book, okay, but you've just finished another book, and you probably have already started a third one. And so, there are a lot of times when you show up for events and you're like, what book am I talking about tonight anyway? And so, but then the nice thing about it is that when it's a series of books, there's going to be that tapestry of information that reconnects all of the books all together like that. And even with this book, there's still threads that are coming from First Frost, and entering into this. One of the big ones, of course, is what happened to Ruth One-Heart, like that, who turns out Walt's got a relative that he doesn't know that he had, like that, and she's disappeared. They don't know what happened to her. And then one of the other ones, big information here, like it is that Walt's daughter, the lawyer, is actually, there's a new governor coming in who's considering appointing her as the new attorney general for the state of Wyoming. And so there's a really big scene at this reception, where Walt, the governor takes him aside and says, hey, I just want to talk to you about this, the possibility of appointing your daughter as the attorney general, the highest, law enforcement official in the state. Do you think you can take orders, from your daughter? And Walt's like, I have since she was 3, so I don't see how it's going to be that much different than anything else, and so, but it's a little bit of a confrontation, a little bit too, because basically what he tells Walt is, if you retire, it will make it easier for her to have this job, because your reputation kind of precedes you, and you're a shadow that she's going to have to get out from behind, and if you retire, then it'll probably work out better for her. And it was interesting because a lot of the editors that I have are young women, and it's interesting to see their notes whenever, because later in that night, at Walt, sitting there with his daughter, and she's chugging down orange juice and slamming it on the kitchen table like it's a bottle of whiskey, and looking at him like that. And they said, we were waiting to see if Walt was going to tell Katie what's going on like that, and how he was going to do that, or was he going to do something horrible and try and hide that information from her. And so, and I can't tell you any more about that conversation until you read the book.
I love it. So what parts of Walt's personality do you really like, and what parts do you like, I'm glad I'm not like Walt?
Well, I mean, the ones that I really like are a lot of the ones that were displayed in these last 3 books, because in Longmire Defense, we really got to see Walt when he was a child, learning how to play chess with his grandfather, who he did not like, and then as he got older, discovered that maybe there was some method to the madness of like how it was that he was having a relationship with his grandson, and then the other one was obviously First Frost, like that, where Walt and Henry, basically are graduating from college, losing their deferment in 1964, and they're going to end up getting drafted and go into Vietnam, and so they enlist like that, and they have to go on this big epic road trip, across the country on Route 66 like that, and the big thing there is like here they are, they've been playing college football for the last 4 years, they're probably in the best physical shape of they're 22 years old. They're probably in the best physical shape of their entire lives. The real bad part is that they're 22 years old and not very smart, and make a lot of mistakes along the way there. Like, and then the next one, like, and of course, is the really world weary after the war Walt, up in Alaska, working security for one of the oil rigs. Like, and to see the I guess it's the moral certainty that he has. Like, I mean, that's the thing, that he's never at a doubt about what's right and what's wrong, and what you do and what you don't do. He's got a very clear idea of that, even in the most complex situations. Like, and I admire that. I admire that a great, great deal. In a complicated world, sometimes it's difficult, and he has a very clear compass on what it is that's right and what it is that's wrong. There's no sliding scale of justice, in Absaroka County. It's everybody gets the same shake, which I think is very admirable in many, many ways. Like, the things that, but see, the problem is like, if you're going to be honest about a character, a lot of their strengths are going to come from their weaknesses. A lot of their weaknesses are going to come from their strengths. Like, and Walt, he's kind of like, there's a part in one of the books where Lucian, the old sheriff, is talking about Walt, and he says he's like a gun. When you point him and pull the trigger, you better make sure you got him pointed in the right direction, because he's not going to stop. And the difficulty with that is, imagine having someone like that in your family, where once they get focused on something, you no longer exist. You're peripheral at that point. They are focused on that job, on that case. That would be, I guess, one of the parts of his character that I think would be difficult, to have to kind of live with. He's also extraordinarily well read, and that can get annoying after a while. So,
Speaking of that, what are you reading now?
You know what I'm rereading? I am rereading Great Gatsby, believe it or not. Like that, I always periodically, and the reason I'm rereading it is because when I read it when I was in school, I hated it. I really did. I thought, this is a stupid book about rich people, and I don't care, And then I got a little older, and I thought, maybe I should read. I always do that. I always think, after you get like about 30 or 40 years, and you think, maybe go back and reread what everybody says was a classic. And of course, I'm reading it now, and I'm like, my God, what an incredible book! This is amazing. Like that, and so that's one. Let's see, what else did I just read? Big Chief. Like, I just read that one here recently. The Buffalo Hunter. I read that one. And then I think also Christy's going to try and get Willie Vlautin, really fantastic writer out of Oregon, like that. He wrote a book called The Horse. If you get a chance, grab a Willie Vlautin book. He's just absolutely amazing. He'll break your heart like that, because it's funny, because I see him like at the Tucson Book Festival, and Judy, my wife, reads his books too. And she's always walking up to him and grabbing him by the shirt front and saying, "You're such a funny, nice, great young man. Please write a book where you don't break our heart at the end of it," And so she kind of slaps him around a little bit. And so he actually did, and I think she had an effect. And so The Horse actually has a kind of a happy ending. So it's new for Willie.
We ask so much of you, and I would hate to ask more, but if we get him, will you interview him for us?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. It's coming. It'll be in your paper. So I've heard you once describe Walt as over.
Uh-huh.
What do you mean by that?
Overweight, overage, overly depressed. Kind of like all of us, to an extent. Like that. I mean, that was the thing. Like that is that when I was putting him together, you want this perfect law enforcement machine. You know, and he is in many ways like that, because the way I'll describe him is if my truck slides off the road on I-25 in January and I'm down in the ditch in the snow, you know, that's the set of headlights that I want pulling up behind me. That's the guy that I want in that truck. But then, of course, like that, then the first thing you got to do is you got to cripple him. You know, he can't be too perfect, like that, or else he's not going to be accessible. He's not going to be human in many ways, like it. And so he's you know, got a little bit of miles on him, like it, you know. He's made some mistakes in his life, like it. He's had some things taken away from him, like it. And so, you know, I think it makes him a lot more relatable, you know, to be honest with you, like that. I get really tired of what I tend to refer to as the 6'2" of Twisted Steel and sex appeal. You know, every woman wanted him, every man feared him. He could kill anyone with a number 2 Ticonderoga pencil in 3.2 seconds, like it, you know. And I don't, you know, when I get up in the morning and look in the mirror, that is not the guy I see, all right? So it's very annoying, like when I'm reading about that character, like I'm always like, you know, I'm very few times have I met anybody like that. You know, generally it's the people that, you know, like Walt, like they'll go further than anybody else. They'll knock on one more door. They'll make one more phone call. They'll look at the file just one more time. You know, they have that dogged quality where they're just not going to let go until it's solved. Look at, and the way I described it was I did a class for the National Sheriff's Association, look at it, and it was with the FBI's academy. And they were asking me about like what I thought what it was like that made Walt as capable as he was. Like, and I said he is the last person that I would ever want after me. You know, if I had done something, this is not the guy I'd want after me, because he is the one that will not let go. He will stay on it, you know, until the very end, like that. And that makes him formidable. And he reads. That's the other thing. He reads. He's one of us. He actually reads books. So, and only those of us who read know what a joy that is, and what an enhancement to our lives that is. Like that. I mean, somebody once asked me and said, if you had to give up reading, you know, to continue writing, would you do it? And I was like, I don't think I could. You know, because the joy of reading is so important to me. Like, and I mean, in so many different ways. I subscribe to like about 4 or 5 different newspapers, this being one of them, and. You know, and I go through those newspapers. I get and read them every week, like that. You know, and then there are the books that I read, and the magazines that I'm like subscribed to, and all those things like that. And there's different types of reading, but I think they all serve a very, you know, important purpose in our lives. And so,
excluding Walt, who is your favorite character to write?
The dog. Yeah,
nods.
The dog. Okay, yeah. No, I mean it varies. Like it varies from time to time. It's according to what kind of a mood I'm in or what it is I'm writing about. I mean, the thing about it, of course, is like, you know, you've heard me say it before, like that great Wallace Stegner quote where he says the greatest piece of fiction ever written is the disclaimer at the beginning of every book that says nobody in this book is based off anybody alive or dead. Like, and what a crock that is. Like, you know, because that's your job, to find interesting people and populate your novels with them. Like, and so what's kind of nice is that there are an awful lot of people from 21 years ago that I put in these novels that are people that I know extraordinarily well, really, really well, and they've passed away since, you know, those 25 years or 20-some years have gone by, but they haven't. They're there in the books, and I don't ever have to think about what they're going to be like, what their responses are going to be like, what they're going to say about certain things. They're still alive. They're still there, like that, and that's a joy in my life, I have to admit.
So 2 or 3 times ago when you were here, it's a lot now. We brought in A. Martinez, and he plays the character Jacob Nighthorse, who's not in any of the books.
Yep. But
he is.
He is.
Can you tell us that story?
He's Dr. Martinez, like in Depth of Winter, is what he is. Like and Zon McLaren, who plays Matthias, who's the police chief, on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. He's Bobby Womack in The Highwayman, that little novella, The Highwayman. And it's kind of interesting because it told me something about my process to a certain extent, because people would always say, well, do you see Robert Taylor, and Katie Sackhoff, when you write the books? And immediately, first thing I say, the major difference between the books and the television show is everybody on the TV show is way too good looking. That's a problem, for me, But then, the other thing is that as I got to know a lot of these actors and actresses, like that they would start creeping in as characters, but not as the roles that they played, but as themselves. And I would find them, as characters in there. Because I remember the first one was Zahn, and Judy was reading the description of him, in the basketball, like graduating high school and playing basketball. And, she says, is that Zahn you're talking about? And I was like, I think it actually is, as a matter of fact. Like that. And so they kind of creep in through the side door there like that. But as I talk to people, like, or get to know people, then I can use them as characters in books. But using actors, that's like a secondary source like that, because, this is an actor who's playing a role. And so to base a character off of a character that they've developed, it's too many, it's too many copies, to make it realistic, it seems like to me. And so, but after you get to know them a little bit, like that, whenever it's always funny to me because I have a theory about that. I have a theory that really nice guys are the ones who play the bad guys in movies and television. Have you ever noticed? Like that, all the guys that have ever played like an entire careers where they played horrible characters, they're the only ones that would take the chance, because they know deep down that they're not like that. They're really nice people. And so they'll take a chance and go ahead, and play a really horrible character or something like that. The ones you got to worry about are the ones that won't play a bad guy. They're the ones that have something to hide there.
Yeah.
That they're, like
Tom
Woody
Cruise.
here.
Yeah, Woody.
Yeah.
Well, if Walt ever needs to come to Spokane, he could meet a nice editor with a stutter and a lisp. Very, very, very compassionate.
Absolutely.
Wise.
Absolutely. Yes.
But would kill you. I will never run out of ink or paper.
You do know I had your son at my house for a whole weekend talking with me, don't you? Like
Right?
Yeah.
So did you get it? Did you land it? Am I going to be in the next book? Okay. Look, one more question, and I want to turn it over to the audience. So how would you characterize your books? Do you think that they're westerns or mysteries or thrillers? You've done some supernatural?
Yeah, I guess, because it's funny to me like that because, they always talk about genre, genre literature like that. And I got to be honest with you, I'm not a big believer in genre. I'm just not like that. I think that there are only two genres, good books and bad books, and you should avoid the bad ones and read the good ones like that. And then, whenever there's a rule like that, whenever somebody gives me a rule, I always think about how I can break it, so there must be some kind of outlaw strain in there somewhere like that. But, for me, I'm kind of like a literary crow. I just fly around out there in all the different genres and everything. And if I find something that I think will work, I just pick it up, bring it back, drop it in the nest with the book, look at it and utilize it. Because I figure the more layers there are to these books, the better they're going to be for you, like that, they'll be more interesting for you than if I'm trying to like stay within a formula, or something like that. So, are they westerns? Yeah. Are they mysteries? Yeah. Are they comedic? Yeah. All of these above. Are they travelogues for Wyoming? Yeah. Anything and everything. Like it all goes into those books. Like it just, try and make more of a realistic portrayal of life, it seems to me like that. Why would you take any one of those and push them aside and not use them? Because most people don't do that, in comedy, or don't use that, like say in a mystery novel. I remember there was a reviewer that did a review for the very first book, The Cold Dish, and his statement was, well, it's about this young woman with fetal alcohol syndrome who's raped by these young men like that who basically get away, with suspended sentences, and somebody starts shooting them with a 45-70 Sharps Buffalo rifle. But it's really funny, He said, I sound like I'm psychotic, but it's a lot of humor in these books like that. And even though they're gut-wrenching like that, there's a lot of humor in them too like that. And so for me, that was kind of telling like that, you are kind of walking a line, that maybe is a little dangerous like that, but for me, it's got to be there. All of those facets have to be there in that book, or else why write them, seems like.
So one last one. I'm sorry, Christy, but my mom had one for you.
Okay.
She's one of those people, very small town. Like our newspaper, I subscribe to my hometown newspaper. We led last week with who visited who at the nursing homes. So very different than the one you read.
Right.
Yeah. So but she loves to tell people when they have these little weird conspiracy theories. She's like, my son's a newspaper editor. That's not how things work. But she came up with this conspiracy theory.
Okay.
That Netflix is no longer has Longmire because WB Paramount wants to have it for themselves. And she just wants to know when filming is going to start.
Okay. Well, first of all, she is right. Okay,
Yeah.
that's number one.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
what happened was, like, on the 10-year mark, that, because you know the whole story, like that. We were on A&E, we were on a standard cable, like, and then we were the highest-rated scripted drama in A&E's broadcasting history. And then what happened was they tried to buy Longmire from Warner Brothers, like at the third year, and Warner Brothers said, "No, we're not going to sell it to you." And they said, "Well, then we're going to cancel the show," which they did, and it proved to be really kind of stupid that they did that. But anyway, it got picked up by Netflix at that point in time, and they did it for 3 years, and it was like one of the highest-rated shows they had. And then what happened was they went to Warner Brothers and said, "We want to buy the show," and Warner Brothers said, "We didn't sell it to A&E. We're not going to sell it to you." And they said, "Well, we're going to end, with our third season, and then you can do what you want." And I think what it was, there was like a sweetheart deal with Netflix in that, since they produced those last 3 seasons, like that they got this sweetheart 10-year deal where they could continue to run the show for 10 years. Well, then when the 10-year contract ran out, they had to drop the show. And so what's happening, of course, is that Warner Brothers is trying to put together a streaming service, kind of like what Paramount has, which makes perfect sense, because all these studios, basically, they're the ones that produce all the content. They're the ones that own all the shows and all the movies and everything, for goodness sake. And so all they need to do is set up a streaming platform, and they can go ahead and start, utilizing all of this material that they have. Well, it seems like they would be extraordinarily stupid to not re-up one of the highest-rated scripted dramas that they've ever had on 2 different networks, for goodness sake. And so we're still waiting to hear what's going to happen, but they kind of have to get their gear together, and we'll see what happens. But Robert has told me he's ready to come back anytime.
Love that. Well, so when we bring you back next year, can we have Robert come too?
Hey, we'll ask him, see what he says.
Look, I will fly him. Well, I won't fly him, but you guys will help me fly him here, right? We'll have like a bake sale. We'll do something. We'll raise the money. We'll fly him here. But we'll do it.
Absolutely.
Spokane, we'll do that.
Okay.
So I know you're. So when you come back in a year, what's that book about?
That book is called The Brothers McKay, and the only way to describe this is give you the family history. My father gave me a copy of The Brothers Karamazov when I was young on Christmas Eve, because it's like a tradition in our family. Everybody in the family gets a book, from everybody like that, because we were big readers like that. And I read that book that night all the way through and into the next day and finished it the next night. And came to the conclusion that this is one of the most incredibly intrinsic, human, layered novels to ever be written, and also one of the worst murder mysteries of all time. If you can't figure out who killed the old man in the first or second chapter, you're an idiot, okay? And so, and then I told my father that, and he said, "Well, you do realize, of course, that when Dostoevsky was writing this novel, it was supposed to be 3 novels. But he died before he got to write the other 2. He said, so who you think might be the murderer might not be the murderer. And so for a long time, I've been thinking about it, wanting to write this book. And what it is, it's a Wyoming retelling of the Brothers Karamazov, is what it is. And so, Walt finds himself in this literary mystery with a lot of layers to it like that, and it's just so odd because he keeps thinking this story seems very familiar somehow, and it's been a fun one to write. I have to admit, it's also one of the fastest I've ever written. For goodness sake, I actually finished it before I went here on tour. I've never finished a book before I went on tour like that, but I jumped on this one and hammered it out in 5 months.
That's awesome.
Started off.
Well, we can't wait for you to be back, Nick.
I'd be here. It's called The Brothers McKay, is what it's called. So I think you'll enjoy it.
All right. So the best part of Northwest Passages is always the audience.
Absolutely.
So we're going to turn them over to you. Raise your hand, and Christy will bring the mic over to you.
This one's easy right here. First couple times ago, you talked about Robert Taylor, and you knew he was Longmire when he went to the door, took his hat off. And how do you feel about like Katie Sackhoff? And obviously, Lou Diamond Phillips is not Henry in size, but how do you feel about the other actors who portray the characters?
Well, there's an education involved whenever you're doing this stuff like that, and most of the time Hollywood cuts you loose. I mean, they don't care what the author thinks of the novels, for goodness sake. They cut you loose and you're gone. And I remember talking to Lee Child, Michael Connolly, and some of the people that had stuff done. And they said, they will slide a check across the table, and that's the last you'll ever know of, whether you might see something on TV that looks kind of like what it is that you did, but then you might not, And this was different. Our showrunners were very, our producers, were very involved with the books, and really wanted to capture the tone, of the books, and realized that there would be differences between a 350-page novel and a 42-page teleplay. There wasn't any way to encapsulate, that kind of weight of story. But as far as casting was concerned, that was kind of interesting too, because that's when they would send me the DVDs of the auditions, and I would get them and go through all the DVDs, and some of them, for Robert's audition, there were 30. There were 30 DVDs of all these different actors that they were thinking about. And then with Lou Diamond Phillips, it was one. They sent me the DVD, and I said, because I said, and it's the first thing I asked, I said, well, I don't know, how big is Lou Diamond Phillips? And they said, he's about 6 foot even, about 180 pounds or something like that. And I said, well, Henry in the books is, challenging Walt, in size. He's a big guy and in better shape. And they said, well, Craig, if we have one actor from the show on The Tonight Show, it needs to be a big name, and Lou Diamond Phillips is a big name. And I was like, okay, well, there you go. So they always would explain to me why it was that they did what that they did. And then with Katie Sackhoff, it was interesting because it was about a dozen actresses, that they sent me the DVDs for And the thing was, she was the best actress. She was the funniest one. And the other thing is that she had, she was from over in Oregon, and she had 4 brothers that, were lumberjacks. And so, they said, and also, because I thought, I don't know anything about her, though, because I didn't know anything about, actors and actresses very much. And so they told me, they said, well, my daughter said, oh, well, just go on YouTube and look up an interview with her, and then you can see what she's really like. And she was on some podcast or something like that, and every other word out of her mouth was "fuck this" and "fuck that." I was like, "She's perfect." For God's sakes, so. And then they asked me, they said, well, what do you think about her having blonde hair? And I was like, well, she's Italian from South Philadelphia. She wouldn't have blonde hair. And they said, well, we're thinking about having her have blonde hair. And I said, do you mind if I ask why? And they said, well, with all the natives on the show, everybody on the show is a brunette. And the only way that we can have her pop and kind of show up, is by having her have a different hair color. And, and they said, Katie's already a redhead, so we need a blonde. And it all made sense. And when you watch the show, even in the very first episode, when they had that fight scene on the road there, she shows up a lot more that. It was very interesting too, because to keep our ratings, she was not allowed to use Vic's signature word, right, from the novels. But if you watch, she says it under her breath about 5 times during the course, and got it by the censors, which I was kind of proud of. I was very happy she did that.
Second question. Here we go.
By the way, if you haven't been to one of my events, this is the way it works. You ask me a question. It takes me about 10 minutes to answer. So we have time for one more question.
You brought up that they all do reading. How do you determine which book, because you highlight a book in every book?
Want to repeat that?
Okay, you highlight a book in every book. How do you choose the book that you're highlighting?
Oh, you mean the books that Walt's reading, or yeah. It's very easy like that. I just have to look at what's the message of this, the book that I'm writing, and can I shadow that, with a certain piece of literature. The first big one like that probably was Hell is Empty. where Walt, was going up into the Bighorn Mountains, where these guys, like these criminals, have like gotten away like that, and they've got a victim that they're taking with them, and they're going up in the mountains, like, and it's cold. It's in the winter, and it's getting colder and colder. And what was interesting to me was that this was kind of turning into one of those manhunt in the snow books, which have been written a lot, and some of them very, very well. But I just thought, I need more layers to this thing. Like, that is what I need. And so what happens is that Cesar Vittoria, the Basque deputy, in the sheriff's department, he got a crime, he had a crime, and a law enforcement degree, but he never read a whole lot. Like, he gets really annoyed because Walt keeps making all these literary allusions, and so he finally asks everybody in the sheriff's department to, make a list of the books that he should have read in college but didn't. And so he does, and everybody in the sheriff's department does. And, Ruby's, the dispatcher, she's always being instructing, and so one of the books that she has in her list is Dante's Inferno. And it was funny, because when I went on tour for that book, I would ask people, I'd say, how many people have, read Dante's Inferno? Some people would raise their hands, and I would say, how many people have finished Dante's Inferno? A lot of the hands went back down, And so, it was kind of interesting like that because it really kind of mimicked, the mechanics of the storyline. Because when you read that book, the further you go into hell, as Dante is being led into hell by Virgil, and I have my own Virgil, this crochetman, because I thought it was a little bit too much to have a Roman poet show up, in the Bighorn Mountains. And so anyway, as he's going further and further into the depths of hell, it's not lakes of fire, it's not walls of flame, it's ice, it's cold. The whole idea being the further you are from the sight of God, the colder the world becomes. And so that, kind of was one of the kickoff points as far as those were concerned. And so next year's book is a little bit of a return to that with the Brothers Karamazov, which is kind of fun. So,
Speaking of next year's book.
I have a question up here when you're done.
Yeah, I've got one here, and then there we'll go. You have already written it, and you name characters after people you know. I'm just curious if there's a Curley in the Brothers McKay.
We're all curious.
I'm not going to give that away. I'm not going to give that away.
All right,
I can't let that go just yet.
All right, here we go.
So, really enjoyed. Last time you were here, we had only read about, I think, one of your books. Now we've read them all.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Have you guys met my brother? Have you met him?
Yeah, checks in the mail.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the things that the differences between the show, we've watched that as well.
Uh-huh.
Two things were missing for me. Dog.
Right.
Major character.
Yep.
And humor. To me, that's a character, and were you disappointed in that aspect not being included as much as your books certainly have?
A little, because for me the humor is so important, because I'll write one serious line in a book and then have 5 or 6 smart-ass lines, to follow it up, and generally those go to Vic, as a general rule, like that. But for me, the humor is such an important part of the humanity of the characters, and also anybody that's ever had a tough job, which is a lot of what it is that I write about. Knows that if you don't have a sense of humor, you're not going to get to the end of the day. It's not going to be happy. And so the difficulty was that when we first started out, we were stuck with 42-minute teleplays. It was 42 minutes long, and that was it, with the commercial breaks and all this kind of stuff. Now, granted, when it moved, to Netflix, it became I remember being in that first meeting with the producers in Netflix. And Netflix is kind of like Logan's Run. Do you remember that old movie, Logan's Run? There's nobody over 30 at Netflix. And I remember, I remember the producers were asking them, they said, well, how long do you want the episodes to be? And, I remember that the executive that was there, and he was like, 2 hours is too long. And they were like, okay. So they had a lot of freedom, but they did not have a lot of freedom when they were with basic cable on A&E. And the problem was I would get these marvelous scripts that would have all this really incredible humor and everything in them, and then they would film them, and then they'd have to cut them back to 42 minutes. And what happened was a lot of the ancillary aspects of the show got cut on the floor like that, and because they had to tell that story in 42 minutes, it had to be about the plot, drive the plot, drive the plot, drive the plot. And then as successful as the show was in those first 3 seasons at A&E, they didn't really want to change it all that much, like that whenever it made that jump to Netflix, like that. So, you know, it's hard for me to argue with the success, you know, that the show's had. But was I disappointed in that? Of course. Yeah, I mean, I think the humor is such an important part, you know, of the books, like that, and of the characters, like that. I was a little disappointed, like that. But hey, you know, it's still a success. Like, it's just 2 separate but equal universes, is what it is.
Yeah. So, are you also disappointed that they don't have Rainier here?
I am deeply disappointed. Look, I have to tell you.
That won't last long, sir.
We've done Rainier here before.
Yes, you have. Yes,
Yeah.
you have. No, that's always the fun part for me, because the books are translated into like a couple of dozen languages, and I've always get these emails from people like that. You know, they're from these like really incredibly beer-rich countries, like, you know, the Czech Republic, Germany, Poland, places like that. And they always write me, and they're always like, "We are so excited! We are finally coming to America this summer, and we are going to have a Rainier beer." And I'm always like, "Yeah, it's a beer. You know, don't get too worked up, all right?" Like that. So,
2 more. This one, and then there's another one over here.
There's so much interesting information about the native culture in your books. I find it just spectacular.
Oh, thank
Where
you.
does that come from?
my ranch is like just to the south of the Northern Cheyenne and the Crow Reservation. So to not have them be, I mean, I read books that take place in my part of the world that don't have any natives in them, and I'm always like, what's your message there anyway? Like, you know, but they're just such incredible people. You know, there's no way that Walt's world, you know, would not have an interaction with that, like that. And when I wrote that first book, The Cold Dish, you know, these, you know, young men like that who are the, you know, the golden boys of this, you know, community, you know, that get away, you know, with raping this young woman, like this native young woman with fetal alcohol syndrome, you know, and it looks more and more, you know, as the book goes on, like Walt's best friend might be the guy that might have done it. You know, he's got all the tools, you know, to do this, and maybe some of the motivations to do it too. Well, the problem is like, you know, I had to have somebody who was going to be emblematic, obviously, you know, to solve this crime, and that kind of predicated the fact that Walt would have to be in law enforcement. I mean, Walt couldn't be an accountant or a banker, like he had to be a sheriff. And the great thing about that is like, you know, you're in charge of all the law enforcement for an area, you know, the size of New Hampshire. You know, I mean, there are counties in Wyoming that are as big as Maryland, for goodness sake. And so I knew that's the direction that that character was going to make. So he was going to be kind of emblematic of the mainstream white culture in Wyoming, but somebody was going to have to be emblematic of the native culture, because those are the two biggest, you know, cultures, you know, there on the highland, you know, I mean, on the high plains. And so I thought, okay, you know, that's how, you know, Henry kind of came to be. You know, and he had to be every bit, you know, Walt's match, you know, and in some ways, you know, even surpass Walt in many ways. And that kind of like, you know, predicated the fact that this is the way this had to be. And so, you know, all of my friends up on the reservation like that, you know, thank goodness, like the books are really popular up there. The television show is really popular up there. I mean, there was only 2 times that I got into trouble. There was one time I was doing a writer's workshop at Lodge Grass on the Crow Reservation with the high school there, and there was a young man like at the end of the talk, like and he looked at me and he goes, "I got a question for you," and you hate to hear it start like that, right? And he goes, "I got a question for you," and I said, "Sure, what is it?" Like, and he said, "Why would you have a character, you know, with all of the wonderful aspects, you know, and facets that Henry Standing Bear has, and obviously be Crow, and turn around and make him Northern Cheyenne?" Like, and I was like, "Yeah, I ain't answering that question. I can tell you that much." And then let's see, what was the other one? Oh, I had a short story. I had a short story that was the very first short story that it was called "Old Indian Trick," and it was in Cowboys and Indians magazine. And most of the action of it took place at the Purple Cow restaurant, which was right there in Hardin, you know, right in the heart of the Crow Reservation, like that. And so, you know, I wrote it like that, but I was, you know, under the impression that you didn't use real people's names or places, you know, anything, so you didn't get sued, like it. So I called it the Blue Cow Cafe, All right, like, and so anyway, whenever we would make runs up to Billings to jump on an airplane or something, we would always stop in and eat, at the Purple Cow. And so there was one time, we walked in, and I looked over on the wall leading up to where the cash register was. They had every page of that short story on the wall leading up to where the cash register was. And I walked up to the cash register, and the owner and operator was there, and she looked at me she's Crow, and I looked over and I said, wow, this is amazing. You got that short story, from Cowboys and Indians magazine, and you put it up here. She goes, yeah, we'd have put all of it up there if the son of a bitch would have put the right name for the restaurant. And I was like, table for two.
All right, last question.
This is kind of a follow-up on what you're talking about. You had control when you're writing the book. When it goes to the TV series on the dealing with Native subjects, how did they handle that? And you didn't have real input, but somebody did?
Actually, I did. You're looking at a creative consultant is what you're looking at here. And mostly my job, though, was a lot of times they would have things like, we want to have a body. I would get a text at 2 a.m. Evidently, that's when TV writers write, they're like vampires, they write at night. And I would get texts like that would say, we want to have a body wash off the Northern Cheyenne Reservation on the Powder River. And I would have to write them back and go, no. And they would write me back and go, you're just being difficult. And I would be like, no, I'm just telling you that the river flows north onto the reservation, not off of the reservation. And also, at that time of year, there's about 2 inches of water in that river. So not only would the body have to do the backstroke, it would have to be an extraordinarily skinny body to do the backstroke off the river. So that's what I did most of the time. And so what happened was the character of Henry is based off a really good friend of mine, Marcus Red Thunder. And talk about somebody we should have come and do the event with us. Marcus should come and do the event with us because he's absolutely hilarious. He's the great thing about the books as far as the native humor. I've always laughed about it because if you ever notice in movies and books and all this, and everything natives are always portrayed as these stoic, kind of. That's not the natives I know. The natives I know work on 17 different layers of irony, and if you're not aware of the irony, you get to be the butt of the irony. And so what I did was I said, look, all I'm going to do is call Marcus and get the answers from him and then turn around and call you guys back. So why don't you just call Marcus and talk with him? Well, he was down there on set practically the entire time they were filming, for goodness sake, because they always had a lot of native issues and a lot of native questions and everything. He even as a matter of fact, they used him in a lot of the crowd scenes, and it kind of, I tended to refer to him as the where's Waldo of the Northern Cheyenne, like that. Because if you watch the pilot episode, in every crowd scene there, he's right there, popping up in all these different scenes, like that. See, I think he was thinking he was going to get another career going or something like that. But yeah, he's like my go-to guy on any of those situations. I can call him up and say, and if he doesn't know the answer to whatever it is that might be very, very specific to the questions I'm asking, if he doesn't know the answer, he knows who I can go talk to on the reservation, to get the answer that I need to find out. And the only time they've ever been a little careful is some of the more religious ceremonies, to make sure that the religious ceremonies do not follow exactly the way that they are, proceeded. And so I've had to be careful about those, But just about everything else, they seem to really love the way that the characters have been represented, and the way the culture and the society has been, and that's important to me. It's very, very important to me because if I wasn't doing that correctly, I'd be doing you an incredible disservice, and I'd be doing them an even worse disservice. So it's very important to me.
Well, the new book, congratulations on it.
Thank you.
So most people won't get to read another new Craig Johnson book for a year.
Yep.
But we, this past year, published a Longmire story in our Christmas edition.
Yes.
And you would not believe all the emails I got and all the... So we're just going to keep doing that every year, okay?
Fantastic. Let's do it.
So everyone else won't get one until May. You're going to get one in December. it was fun to see it in newsprint.
I've got it. It was wonderful because Johnny brought me my 2 copies, and because I begged him, I was like, please send me a physical copy of this so I can frame it up, and put it on the wall and everything, and they didn't. And so then whenever he showed up, boom, he was like, here you go. And it was just so incredible to fold it out and to see it like that. And there's Walt. There's a picture of Walt holding, the jar. And I don't know if you know the story or not, but how it happened was I was doing all these Christmas events and I was doing an event in Sleep, and I got snowed in over there because snowed over the mountain in the Bighorns, and you can't get over. And so I had to spend the night, and so they gave me a room and a bed and breakfast there, and one of the things the wife and the husband do is they bake. They do their own sourdough bread, and the next morning they did this cranberry walnut sourdough bread. I mean, fresh out of the oven, and it was incredible. And I started talking to them about it, and they started telling me about how when you do sourdough, you have to have these starters. And there are these heirloom starters that families have that are go all the way back to the Bozeman Trail, for goodness sake. And they explained to me how you have to give it, they name them, and you have to give it a comfortable, place to live, and you have to feed it, and all these kind of things. And I was like, this is Walt Longmire's worst nightmare is what this is. And so on a very busy Christmas Eve, she's going away, and Walt has to take care of Abraham, the mason jar, and he has to carry it around with him the whole time on this very, very busy Christmas Eve. And so it was a really fun one to write. And so I was very glad that it turned out to be the premier one, for the newspaper.
It was wonderful. And my favorite thing was our new general managers in the back. I'm telling you now, I forgot to tell our previous. We had so many people from around the country order these because they wanted to be able to, because you released them digitally and they'd never been able to hold the Christmas story before.
That's great.
So it was wonderful. It was wonderful. So next year we should print more so we can mail them. So we have a special gift for you. Every year I try to do something fun, and this is in 2 parts. The first part is I showed you that we have our beer. It doesn't come out till October. But when we announced that we were going to become a nonprofit, I just like to take my clothes off. I can't help it. So I announced it by showing the world our new beer with these shirts that say America Needs Journalists. So this is for you.
Thank you.
And then we also have the one that says it's Freedom's favorite beer. Yeah.
Tastes like freedom.
Yeah, right. Tastes like freedom. Yeah. With the constitutional, the Bill of Rights for free speech, press, and craft beer. So,
thank you.
There's one more, and this one's the special one. And I know Walt loves Rainier, but it sucks. No Lie is the real beer. And this is the First Amendment beer, but you'll notice that it's Longmire First Amendment beer.
Oh, my gosh.
Right?
Holy free holies.
I know.
Oh, my gosh.
I know. So there is a 6-pack of First Amendment Longmire beer.
Gosh.
So in case you're wondering, that's what it looks like.
How am I going to get this home?
Oh, I know. So I may or may not know a person who can help us get it home. So yeah, great stuff, right? So
oh, my gosh. This is Robert Taylor's dream come true, is what this is. I'm going to have to fight him tooth and nail, for gosh sake, because he's definitely going to want to steal this.
Well, we always try to, we love that you begin your tours here. It means the world to us.
Oh, thank you.
So,
thank you. My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, so we want you to, so I have some news for you all. So there's your books, a lot of them in the back. And if you buy the book, we'll give you one of these.
Oh, a book and a beer.
Right.
That's as good as it gets.
It's the most Spokane thing I've ever heard, reading and drinking. So if you were at the VIP thing, all you have to do is show your badge, and they'll give you one of the beers. The beers don't go on sale until October. And I'm not going to lie, the label's going to change a little bit, so you guys will be the only ones with the original label. Yeah. Upcoming events. So Jess Walter is coming. I have some bad news. It is so sold out, and it is 700 seats have sold out. So Maura McDonald is going to be here later this month, and we brought some. I love it when you can bring somebody in who's not me to do the interviews. So we brought in again one of the most famous authors in America, Jamie Ford, to interview her. So boy, that's going to be something, right? I mean, we're going to have more brain power. It's going to be great. We'll all play Scrabble and win. So we have a raffle while he's getting ready to get set up so we can all buy our books and get our beer. I work in the most handsome building in Spokane. I had these stickers made. I love them, but they should be plush. And I'm giving away, look how great that looks there. That looks great, right? So Carol Nelson, you get our plush version of the tower. I love the gargoyles, the Printer's Devils. You saw in the picture with Craig and I. Again, it had to be plush. So David Eash, you're getting the plush. For every book club for the last 7 years, we've given away this print. And Susan Lindsay, you'll get this print. One night, our designer had a little to drink and decided it should look like this. And Katie Stewart gets that. And I know the shirt, it's something, right? So Jeff Ortiz and Janice Ludham, you get one of our American Needs journalist shirts. And then Freedom's Favorite Beer shirts are Stacy Thomas and Loris Jordan. And this is my favorite because you can't buy this until October, and the rest of you can have one. But Max Patterson gets a full 6-pack. So party at Max's. So please support what we're doing. This book club is what kickstarted the whole thing. So help join our First Amendment Club. Look, you're going to look cool. That's just cool, right? So I'm going to leave this up here. This, if you scan it and fill out the thing, fast pass to heaven. They just let you straight in. You wear your First Amendment Club shirt, and they're like, yeah, come on in. Come on in. So thank you all for coming. We love having you hang out with us. And once again, this is the coolest book club in America.